Welcome to Adeline Redesign. I am flipping 8 nightstands simultaneously. I'm doing a scratch test now. I left and have come back to test them all out because I've done different things on different nightstands. They all did fairly well. I had initially labeled some as winners and labeled some as losers, but after being honest about it, how many people are attacking their side tables with forks the way I had to be very aggressive. So the black paint did better. It was a higher quality, more expensive paint. Here are the ones that I painted with one layer of the yellow paint, and they did not do well. Taking the yellow paint off, I decided I was going to be removing the black paint from one of the nightstands you see here. Based on how challenging it was to remove, I eventually stop and reconsider what I'm going to call a winner and what I'm going to call a loser. It is very durable, and so it doesn't need to be scraped off. I also wondered to myself if these were work-appropriate pajamas. I guess they are. Where I've done scratch tests, I am sanding the tops so that I can go back in with the paints and have the places that I marked up not be visible after I apply another coat or two of paint. I'll be in pajamas for a lot of this episode because I'm sick, but I can't stay in bed all the time, and I miss my furniture, so I keep coming out to do a little here and a little there. The black nightstands and the white nightstands, there will be 2 of each that I am doing a very special kind of coating on the top to hide the water damage and create a faux finish. And I've referenced it a couple of times because I am very excited to show you and to discuss the science of concrete advancement and how it now allows us to do some things that we once could not. Concrete is very strong. It is incredibly strong, but it always cracks. Ask any sidewalk you've ever met and you will find out that concrete cracks. The answer to that problem is to make it more flexible because despite it having structural integrity, it cracks.
I spent 1 hour of the last 2 days working on the 8 side tables. I have COVID, so mostly I'm working on sleeping.
There are several things I will be using to help ensure that the concrete does not crack and remains as flexible as possible to the extent that concrete can be flexible. One is superplasticizers. Additionally, I'll be using an admixture, and I'll be using cement board tape where there is risk of some movement. It's important if you want to use this method and have something of a concrete veneer on a table that you use tables that are very sturdy so that they're not especially flexible themselves. Countertops are often very good candidates for this kind of application because you don't move your countertops around. But if you're going to be doing it on a table, you want to be doing it on a table that is not flexible. I am going to be making a project board here, or sample board, so that I can decide which specific kind of concrete veneer I want to use. By the way, I'll be saying cement and concrete interchangeably repeatedly. What I'm using is Henry Feather Finish. It's an underlayment usually used under floors. The concrete that I put on with the trowel, I then am going over with a wood graining tool, usually used in paint, which I wipe off soon after and use the broom, as you see, to soften the look of the wood grain. As it dries, it does not look ideal, but when we get to a final finished product, I think you're going to be amazed at how wonderful it really looks. I've put a piece of tape down the middle of the board because I'm going to be applying one side, as you saw, using the wood graining tool, and the other side I'm not going to be using the wood graining tool. I'm going to be going it over and over with the trowel to create texture. And now we'll see a close-up of what it looks like with the wood graining tool, and the other side where I just use the trowel to create a wood-like effect 2 hours later as it dries. You get a better idea of what this is going to look like, and then I'm going to go in with some 100 grit sandpaper. I find the best time to go in with sandpaper is when the concrete is still a little moist. I didn't do that this time, but I would recommend it, and I will do it in the future. After another hour passes, I decide it's time to go in with paint. And I'll be using white paint on half that I've done the wood-like effect, as well as half that I've done the wood graining tool, so that I can get a feel for which one of those I may prefer. When I finish with the sample board, I will have 8 options to choose from, and I will pick my 2 favorite. While I'm doing that, I'll talk a little bit about superplasticizers, which are also called high-range water reducers. They're additives that are for making high-strength concrete, and they reduce the need for water by up to 30%, sometimes more. The simplest way I can think to explain what they're doing is they make concrete feel repelled by itself. So because it doesn't want to touch itself, it is not clumping together, it is more fluid. Reducing how much water is in the concrete means that there will be less shrinkage as it dries. And because there will be less shrinkage, there is less likelihood of cracking. Less water means that the concrete is less porous and is therefore also stronger. The Henry Feather finish that I'm using is approximately $25 a box. I use less than half of it for this project. The superplasticizer that I use, approximately $3. I use far less than a third of it. And the additive, that's the bonding agent, is $10. I used approximately a third of it. That means it works out to be about $4 per tabletop, which is a good deal for me. It would not be as much as you would probably want to spend to have a sidewalk. Concrete is readily available. It's one of the most prolific substances on the planet. It is incredibly affordable, and the method that I use is one of the less affordable ways to do it. But if you wanted to try something less expensive than Henry Feather finish, what you could do is get a regular bag of concrete. They're about $5 for a lot. And then you can sieve it, use a sieve or a strainer to take out the large coarse aggregate. That would not be as smooth of a product, but sanding could come into play in helping make it more smooth, especially because part of doing this is applying texture. You wouldn't necessarily need it to be that smooth. Using a superplasticizer is also optional. Using the bonding agent is optional as well. You could use something as simple as Elmer's glue instead of the bonding agent. All of those would reduce the cost. They would also reduce the durability and increase the risk of cracking, but that is a risk that you can take if you want. And the way that I do it is up to a point. It's a point of pride, not necessity, that it be so incredibly indestructible and unlikely to crack as it is. That I intend to sell it also makes me unwilling to take those kinds of risks because it won't be my table.
I spent about 3 hours today working on the 8 side tables.
I decide that while I really like the way it looks in plain black, the white looks far too stark to me. So I'm going to be using 2 different natural wood kind of colors on both, and then wiping them back for a faux finish that I really like in the beige that I'm doing in the video now. The darker brown, I don't like the effect of that. So ultimately, I will choose to do the beige that I then will wipe back on the white nightstands, and I will use the black as is on the black nightstands. But it was fun to do all of these different finishes. You can see them here. I do not like the ones in the middle. This is another way to help prevent cracking. What I have is cement board tape, and my cost was about $1.50 for all of what I used on these tables. One roll is $9. Much like the prep work of cleaning and doing structural repair, I am a firm believer in the idea that doing these in bulk the way that I'm doing has saved me an enormous amount of time, but I also have to admit that my energy is flagging because it's starting to be a little bit dull, and that's hard for me because I think a lot of the work of furniture refinishing is kind of dull to begin with, so that I'm getting bored is a challenge. It's hard to bore me, but this is managing to eventually. Watching the video again, it reinforces for me how useful it is to do this back to back to back to back to back, because the first time that I go onto the table with the Henry Feather finish, it takes me a while to get comfortable with what I'm doing, but by the time I go to the second table, I'm doing it faster and better, and so on and so forth, until by the time I get to the fourth table, I'm really going at quite a clip. Part of why my energy is flagging is nothing to do with the tedium of refinishing using each step back to back to back. It's because I'm at the point of this recording approximately 4 weeks into the project of these 8 side tables, and they're still not complete. But that's because of those 4 weeks, I've been out of town for about 2. I had COVID for 1, and I also have a job. In addition to, I don't always work on weekends. So this is a hobby that pays for itself at this point, though I would like it to become something that is more like my career. Though I'll never stop doing the other work that I do. I love it too much. It's entirely unrelated to furniture, has more to do with people. And so I think that if I didn't have COVID and if I hadn't been out of town for half of the time, then I looked at this as 1 week worth of working on furniture for me, that I would feel much more energized by it than I do. And that's worth noting. I need to keep that in mind, that there are some factors at play that are not what is causing this to bore me up to a point. And it's nice to look back. I do 2 coats on each of the tables. The first one to make sure that I'm covering the cement board tape, and then the second coat that I do is going to be the faux finish before I add the paint. I'm going to be doing on the one that's white, and then peach or beige will be without the wood graining tool. That will just be where I go over and over, as you see on screen here, with the trowel to give it a wood-like effect. And then the black I'm going to be doing with the one that has the wood graining tool. And looking back on how much progress I've made, that does give me some energy to want to go out there and get back at it. I had been working on 2 pieces that I put many hours into before I accidentally rolled something onto it. I'm still not even sure what the kind of fuzz was, but I'm going to need to sand down at least 2 of the tables that I was very nearly done with, and that's part of why I'm not feeling particularly motivated to go out there. Something I didn't expect that's been very positive for me in being on YouTube is that there's an accountability to the audience that this is created, and I appreciate that about it. Your comments and seeing that people are liking and viewing the videos is really uplifting in a way for me. I love teaching, and so to know that there are people that are gaining from this as I'm doing it is very helpful. And there's only so much physically that one can do, and so doing voiceover work and editing work and learning those things is an additional way that I can spend more time on furniture when I'm physically just incapable of pushing myself any further. Now I'm going to be sanding these when they are still a little wet, which is the preferred method, and it doesn't kick as much dust up, which is also, of course, safer. Arguably or inarguably, I'm not going to argue, but I should be more protective of my skin and my lungs than I have been for parts of this. When I'm using the Ben Shellac primer is one example of when I should have been protecting my lungs more than I was, so I am sorry to my lungs. Please forgive me. If you want to try this out for yourself, what you'll want to do is have approximately 1 cup of Henry Feather Finish and a 1/4 of a teaspoon of a superplasticizer, and then I use half water and half of the acrylic fortifier and bonding agent, approximately, maybe less than half. You have probably 15 minutes in which to work. If you're using a superplasticizer, that will slow down how quickly it sets up. If you're not using a superplasticizer, then you're gonna have less time in which to work. Whether or not you want that is up to you. If you add more water, you will have more time in which to work, but you won't have as thick of a product. And the more texture that you have, the higher the risk that there will be some chipping, which you can cover by dyeing the concrete if you want, or you could cover the issue by having your tables be gray or your concrete be white, which is a little more expensive. Coming up, I'll put the second coat on the future black nightstands that have the wood graining tool used. I use a method that's a little better than I was using when I had the project board that I was working on. I hope you will join me for that and to see some more painting. I don't know if I'd mentioned I bought 6 more nightstands, so while I haven't finished this project just yet, I do have another assembly line style project in the future in mind already.